So, do you have to go to school to be a philosopher?
Oh, God, no. Thank God you don't have to go to school. No, a philosopher's a lover of wisdom. It takes tremendous discipline, takes tremendous courage to think for yourself, to examine yourself. That Socratic imperative of examining yourself requires courage. You know, William Butler Yeats used to say, it takes more courage to examine the dark corners of your own soul than it does for a soldier to fight on the battlefield. Courage to think critically. You can't talk. Courage is the enabling virtue for any philosopher, for any human being, I think, in the end. Courage to think, courage to love, courage to hope. Plato says philosophy is a meditation on and a preparation for death. And by death, what he means is not an event, but a death in life, because there's no rebirth, there's no change, there's no transformation without death. And therefore the question becomes, how do you learn how to die? And of course, Montaigne talks about that, his famous essay, to philosophize is to learn how to die. You can't talk about truth without talking about learning how to die. And I believe that Theodore Adorno is right when he says that the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. That gives it an existential emphasis, you see. So that we're really talking about truth as a way of life as opposed to simply truth as a set of propositions that correspond to a set of things in the world. Human beings are unable to ever gain any monopoly on truth, capital T. We might have access to truth, small t, but they're fallible claims about truth. We could be wrong. We have to be open to revision and so on. So there is a certain kind of mystery that goes hand in hand with truth. This is why so many of the existential thinkers, be they religious like Meister Eckhart or Paul Tillich, or be they secular like Camus and Sartre, that they're accenting our finitude and our inability to fully grasp the ultimate nature, reality, the truth about things. And therefore you talk about truth being tied to the way to truth. Because once you give up on the notion of fully grasping the way the world is, you're going to talk about what are the ways in which I can sustain my quest for truth. How do you sustain a journey, a path toward truth, the way to truth? So the truth talk goes hand in hand with talk about the way to truth. And scientists could talk about this in terms of, adducing evidence and drawing reliable conclusions and so forth and so on. Religious folk could talk about this in terms of surrendering one's arrogance and pride in the face of divine revelation and what have you. But they're all ways of acknowledging our finitude and our fallibility. I want all of the rich historical colorations to be manifest in talking about our finitude. Being born of a woman in stank and stench, what I'd call funk. Being introduced to the funk of life in the womb and the love push that gets you out. Right? And then your body is not just death, but the way Vico talks about it. Here, Vico is so much better than Heidegger. Vico talks about it in terms of being a corpse. See, Heidegger doesn't talk about corpses. He talks about death. It's still too abstract. Absolutely. Read the poetry of John Donne. He'll tell you about corpses that decompose. Well, see, that's history. That's the raw, funky, stanky stuff of life. That's what bluesmen do. See, that's what jazzmen do. See, I'm a blues man in the life of the mind. I'm a jazz man in the world of ideas. Therefore, for me, music is central. So when you're talking about poetry, for the most part, Plato was talking primarily about words, whereas I talk about notes, I talk about tone, I talk about temper, I talk about rhythms. See, for me, music is fundamental. Philosophy must go to school not only with the poets, philosophy needs to go to school with the musicians. Keep in mind, Plato bans the flute in the Republic, but not the lyre. Why? Because the flute appeals to all of these various sides of who we are, given his tripartite conception of the soul, the rational and the spirited and the appetitive. And the flute appeals to all three of those. Where he thinks the lyre on one string only appeals to one, and therefore is permissible. Now, of course, the irony is when Plato was on his deathbed, What did he do? Well, he requested the Thracian girl to play music on the flute. I'm a Christian, but I'm not a Puritan. I believe in pleasure. And orgiastic pleasure has its place. Intellectual pleasure has its place. Social pleasure has its place. Televisual pleasure has its place. You know, I like certain TV shows. My God, when it comes to music, you know, Beethoven's 32nd Sonata, Opus 111, unbelievable aesthetic pleasure. Same would be true for Curtis Mayfield, the Beatles, or what have you. There's a certain pleasure of the life of the mind that cannot be denied. It's true that you might be socially isolated because you're in the library at home and so on, but you're intensely alive. In fact, you're much more alive than these folk walking these streets of New York in crowds, which is no intellectual interrogation and questioning going at all. But if you read, you know, John Ruskin, or you read a Mark Twain, or, oh my God, Herman Melville, you almost had to throw the book against the wall because you're almost so intensely alive that you need a break.
You're electrified.
Exactly. It's time to take a break and get a little dullness in your life, you know. Take Moby Dick, throw it against the wall the way Goethe threw von Gleiss's work against the wall. It was just too much. It reminded Goethe of the darkness that he was escaping after he overcame those suicidal impulses we saw as a young brother in the 1770s and made his move toward neoclassicism in Weimar. There are certain things that make us too alive, almost. It's almost like being too intensely in love. You can't do anything. It's hard to get back to chronos. It's hard to get back to everyday life, you know what I mean? That kairotic dimension of being in love with another person. Everything is so meaningful, you want to sustain it. You just can't do it, you know. You got to go to the bathroom, have a drink of water, shit.